Well, hello, friends, and welcome to the Imago Nutrition Podcast. My name is Mark, along with Danielle. This is the podcast where we answer your questions and give you practical nutrition strategies to help you and your family flourish. And let me say this real quick. If you are a vegan, but even if you are not a vegan, I think we have a particularly interesting topic today, and that both groups will benefit from this, whether you're vegan, whether you're vegetarian, whether you're omnivore, or one of those emerging carnivore folk. This is, I think, an interesting question. We have some very cool new research, I think. I've really been kind of nerding out on this little study that we're going to talk about the importance of protein intake for health, perhaps with a dimension that you haven't considered when it comes to protein. We have not touched on this topic yet. And so all that said, by the way, if you have a question for us about this topic or about anything else, or a problem we can help you solve with nutrition guidance, please send that to us. You can do so by going to imagonutrition.com/podcast. There's a little form there that you can fill out, and that will send your question to us. And then we'll, of course, take a look at those for possible topics of future podcast episodes. So again, would love to give you some free value, some free guidance. It helps us cultivate, kind of our content, but hopefully it helps you ultimately change your life for the better. So today's question is this, but first, Danielle, I haven't even said hi. I'm sorry about that. You guys went camping this weekend, right? How was that?
It was great. It was a little hotter than we wanted. We were asking for fall. We got it the second morning though.
Right.
So
we're on the cusp of October. So I'm down in the South. I'm in Tennessee. Y'all are up in the St. Louis area, and we've had kind of some cooler mornings, but still warm days, right? So we're not up in the north where it's kind of cool and then stays cool and just gets a little more, less cool during the day. We're still in that, like, for us down here, it's like that 20-degree swing. We'll do like. We'll do like, when I walk out in the morning, it might be like 63, but then by the day it's 83, or something like that. So
yeah,
that's fun. And the boys are still loving camping. You guys took the camper out?
Yes. And Graham got his cast off this morning, so he has a great start to his day.
Oh man, that's awesome.
Exciting.
I've had a cast once, and I did remember getting it off was perhaps the weirdest thing, because I saw that guy coming at my leg with a saw, and I'm like, how is that not going to cut through the entire thing into my bone? But those magic little saws, they just get the right part. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I saw that fear on his face.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right. So the question that we have before us, and Danielle, if you don't mind, I'll kind of walk us through this. And so this question came to me fairly recently, onboarded a nutrition client who is a vegan. And so this question comes up a lot, not just in conversations, but also in the work that we do. And so I think it's an important one. But again, I think there's implications and learnings even for non-vegans. Okay. So we've got kind of an isolated question, an isolated study that speaks to it, very recent study, but I think there's learnings for the broader audience. So I hope this is fun, interesting, educational in that sense. And so the question is this, very simply, well, how much protein do vegans need? Okay. So need is an interesting question. So we're going to kind of talk about that and where some of the recommendations hinge and why they hinge on certain recommendations based off kind of this understanding of need. And when we say need, what are we really kind of talking about underneath the surface? Okay, so I'm going to kind of hone in on that. But the question of how much protein do vegans need, I think is a very interesting one. Okay, so I'd like to set this up real quick by saying that what I think maybe many of us know, but I want to define veganism just real quick. It's essentially the practice. I know many of my vegan friends would say it's more than that. It's more than a diet. It's more than a practice. It's more than a regimen. It's really a lifestyle. Okay. Some may say it's an ideology, right? And so it's a very all-encompassing, I would say, to their credit. They're looking to be consistent in this area of in many areas of life with this practice of abstaining from the use of animal products. But yes, particularly in nutrition. I've got a friend, one of my good buddies up in Minnesota. We go back and forth. He's a vegan. We chat online and that sort of stuff. And he would say, vegan is about so much more than nutrition. Of course, that's true. But I would also say, but you you can't be a vegan while still consuming animal products. So it's kind of the crux of it, really, I think, has a lot to do with nutrition. And then it pours out from there, which I can appreciate. Okay. Because again, I love when people are looking for consistency in all areas of life based off what they believe. So kudos to vegans for really thinking about the implications of that belief system throughout all areas of their life. Okay. So again, the practice of abstaining from the use of animal products, particularly in their diet or their nutritional regimen, which we're going to be referring to today. Okay. So again, how much protein do vegans need? We have to first ask the question, well, how much protein is recommended for all of us? Okay, so we'll start there, then we'll get into sort of a subset. For that, as nutrition practitioners, Danielle and I go to what's known as the dietary reference intakes. Okay, so this is a starting place for us to begin to answer this question for the broader population, and then we'll dig into what that means for a subset. So the DRI, as we call it, these are basically documents that are issued by the Food and Nutrition Board, okay, of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. Okay, so the Food and Nutrition Board addresses various issues with this document, including safety, quality, adequacy of the food supply. They help us establish principles and guidelines of adequate dietary intake or nutritional intakes. And then they really sort of render, quote, authoritative judgments, if you will, quote unquote, on the relationships between food intake, nutrient intake, and general health outcomes. Okay. So that's really the purpose of what the DRIs are there for. It's to help us establish some of these recommendations for the population. Okay. So it's a general term, for a set of basically reference values, if you will, used to plan and assess nutrient intakes for the hope of healthy adult outcomes, if you will, if that was stated, right? So what they're doing is not giving one-to-one individual recommendations. That's where, you should work with a nutrition practitioner like Danielle or myself to really take in all the context of your life, your preferences, various contexts. But we start with the DRI because there's a lot of work and a lot of things that go on behind the scenes to establish those. And within the DRI, I just wanted to quickly talk about, there's a few different acronyms baked into there that, when we went through our training, of course, we learn all these and we see these and understand them. But a lot of people don't know that within the dietary reference intakes, there's several different subsets of sort of recommendations, if you will. So it's key to know which one you're talking about to start. So number one would be the RDA. This is the recommended dietary allowance. Okay, so I wanted to pull some definitions of this, so I'm just going to read some definitions. So the recommended dietary allowance, or the RDA, is the average daily level of intake sufficient to meet the nutrient requirements of nearly all, that's 97 to 98% of healthy individuals. It's often used to plan nutritionally adequate diets for individuals. So that starts to hone in on some individual considerations, okay? The second one would be the adequate intake, or the AI. It's not the sexiest AI being talked about these days, but the adequate intake is AI. And this is the intake at this level that is assumed to ensure nutritional adequacy. This is established when evidence is insufficient to develop an RDA, which is the recommended dietary allowance. Okay, so the adequate intake is used when evidence is insufficient to develop a recommended dietary allowance. All right. The third one is the EAR, the estimated average requirement. I think there's misconception about this one too. So this is the average daily level of intake estimated to meet the requirements of 50% of healthy individuals, usually used to assess the nutrient intakes of groups of people and to plan nutritionally adequate diets for them. So we're talking about groups. For 50% of healthy individuals. And this can also be used to assess the nutrient intakes of adults. So that's the EAR, the estimated average requirement. And then finally, there is the tolerable upper intake level, shortened to just the UL. Okay. And so the tolerable upper intake level is the maximum daily intake that is unlikely to cause adverse health effects. Okay, so you've got the RDA, which is the recommended dietary allowance. You've got the adequate intake. You've got the estimated average requirement, and you've got the tolerable upper intake level. So I want to go back to that first one, that RDA, the recommended dietary allowance. Let's pull that out. That is the one that we're going to be examining today. Okay, so we want to take a look at what is the recommended dietary allowance of protein. What are the considerations that went into that, and what are the implications for this question, which is, as a vegan, how much can I rely on that number? What do I need to think about for that? And again, I think there's some learnings for omnivores and vegetarians and everyone alike in this regard. So any thoughts on that, Danielle, before I move on, just about breaking out the DRIs or your experience with that?
No, I remember all those questions on my test. That was so long ago. But yeah, the RDA, why we're taking that out is really, it's considering 95 to 97. Is that what you said? Was it
97 to 98 is what I'm seeing?
Okay. Yeah.
So. Yep.
And
I think I would have too. I think I would have put it at the number 95, is a recurring number in our work, I know, and so I don't know if I remembered that it was even beyond that. It was 97 to 98, which is really compelling. Yep. So let's talk about that RDA. I do think there's some misconceptions about this, about what it means, and the implications. So what is the RDA? What is the recommended dietary allowance? This doesn't mean necessarily the goal. It doesn't mean, again, it's not the tolerable upper intake level. It doesn't mean going above this is now detrimental to your health, right? But it does start to set a foundation for this conversation. So according to the DRI, the Dietary Reference Intakes, the RDA of protein, or for protein, the recommended dietary allowance for protein of a sedentary adult. So it starts there. Okay. So as soon as you are more active than someone that doesn't work out at all, you need to know that you already have a consideration that goes above and beyond the number I'm about to give you. Okay. So if you do exercise at all, okay, this number, you've got to kind of unhook from this number because you have different considerations above what the RDA was established to guide, which is for a sedentary adult, the RDA says that they should consume 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Okay. So if you're in America, you're like, oh my gosh, kilograms. I still don't understand what those things are. It's 0.36 grams per pound. So if you know your body weight, you multiply that by 0.36. That is what a sedentary adult should consume in terms of protein per day. Okay. Now, if you run that calculation real quick on your phone, you're listening to this, you're like, okay, body weight 150 times 0.36. Like, wow, that's really not that much. You're right. It's really not. So we're going to talk about kind of what that means and what that baseline is intended to do. So I'm going to be referencing a study soon. So I've pulled out a couple quotes from that study because I do think they do a good job of digging into kind of the RDA, the implications, the history, the point of it. And so one of the things that the study we're about to talk about brings up is that the RDA is based on the results of numerous nitrogen balance studies. Okay, don't roll your eyes back. I think nitrogen balance is really cool, really fascinating. We're going to dig into that. Okay, you hear me always talk about energy balance, right? Like calories in, calories expended. We're going to talk about nitrogen balance. Okay, so just know that the RDA of 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day protein is based on the result of numerous nitrogen balance studies, okay, which are considered the gold standard criteria for determining protein requirements. All right. So the current U.S. protein RDA was determined using nitrogen balance studies in omnivores and a few vegetarians, all of whom consume animal products, at least in part. And with the vegetarians, they were consuming up to 10% of their protein, or their total calories, I should say, from animal protein sources. Okay, so you can see that the RDA was based off, it was based off sedentary adults, okay, with the purpose of establishing nitrogen equilibrium, okay, which we'll talk about here real quick, okay, which is really the gold standard. This is why that protein requirement is established. But know that that number is based off nitrogen balance studies in omnivores and a few vegetarians. So vegans have different considerations than the select group of people used to establish this number, okay? And what we have not seen is a study that really looks at nitrogen balance for vegans until this summer, okay? So summer of 2023, we have it thanks to the University of Arizona, okay? And so, or maybe it was Arizona State. I'm forgetting. It's one of those two. I think it's Arizona State. Okay. College of Health Studies, I think. I should have had that in my notes. Sorry, Arizona State, ASU. Oh, wait, I have a link right here in my notes. Hold on, let me click on it real fast. Oh, no, I don't have the full link. Okay, well, it's one of those schools. So I think it's Arizona State. It is. Yeah, it's Arizona State. So it is the College of Health Solutions, Arizona State University. I'm so sorry, especially because ASU and UA are in-state rivals. Okay, all right. My wife's from Phoenix, so I'm sorry I got that one wrong. All right, real quick. All right, so at the crux of this RDA, this recommended intake of protein for all of us, not just vegans, is this concept of nitrogen balance. Okay, so some of you have never heard of this, never thought of it. Okay, protein is the only macronutrient, okay, containing nitrogen. Okay, I believe it's the only compound we consume that contains nitrogen. Okay, so protein status is determined by comparing the amount of nitrogen ingested to the amount of nitrogen excreted. So again, kind of like energy balance, how many calories we taking in, how many are we expending or burning, right? That's how you get the energy balance equation. Within that now, within protein, there's what's known as a nitrogen balance. Okay, some of you may be like, well, why does that matter? And we'll talk about that. Okay, so nitrogen balance is essentially, very simply, nitrogen consumed versus nitrogen expended or excreted, okay? And so this is key too. And sorry, I'm kind of nerding out. I just think this is fascinating. Okay. A negative nitrogen balance indicates net protein catabolism. Catabolism. Okay. Not cannibalism. Okay. And a positive nitrogen balance indicates a net anabolic state. So we're talking about catabolism and anabolism. Real quick. Catabolism. Okay. Is the breakdown of complex molecules in living organisms to form simpler ones. Together with the release of energy, this is also known as, and this kind of it's kind of a shocking term, but this is biologically appropriate. Catabolism is known as destructive metabolism. Okay, it is breaking things down. Okay, anabolism is the synthesis of complex molecules in living organisms from simpler ones together with the storage of energy. This is known in biological terms as constructive metabolism. One is breaking walls down, if you will. The other one is building walls. And then, of course, right in the middle is equilibrium. You're not taking walls down. You're not building walls, right? You're not in a destructive metabolic state. You're also not in a constructive metabolic state. You're in an equilibrium, okay? And yes, we can ebb and flow in and out of these things fluidly. It's not like you're locked into one, and from day to day, you might be ebbing and flowing. But suffice it to say, your metabolism is either deconstructing or constructing, or it's at equilibrium, right? So all of that is to say, back to this question, how much protein do vegans need, okay? There was, again, a fascinating study from Arizona State University, okay, not to be confused with the University of Arizona, right? Particularly the College of Health Solutions. I really appreciated the study. By the way, you can look up the study. It takes, I've read through it 3 times. It takes about maybe 15 to 20 minutes, depending on, your style of reading, right? And don't worry, by the way, take us up on the opportunity to go read this study. There are a lot of studies that are pretty dense. This one is not nearly as dense as most studies to read through it. You can read through this without any nutritional background and understand probably 80% of it, okay? You're going to get far more than you think from reading this, because they use real language in the study. I really appreciate it. It reads very easy relative to some studies, okay? So the study is called this. You can Google it. Nitrogen balance at the recommended dietary allowance. So there's the RDA for protein in minimally active male vegans. Okay, so we're going to talk about this. This is a first of its kind study that is looking at nitrogen balance specifically related to the RDA in vegans specifically, because again, the RDA was established with omnivores and vegetarians. Okay, so this is a cool study. I hope there's more like this, and the researchers acknowledge that we need to do some more work on females. We need to do some more work with activity levels. We need to have some crossover studies. We need to give them a couple different variables, which I can appreciate. But I love that they knew that they were on the cusp of kind of a new topic, so they're going to kind of set the standard. And I hope some other research organizations and groups pick up the mantle and continue this work. So I think it's really fascinating. Okay. So nitrogen balance and the recommended dietary allowance for protein in minimally active vegan males. This is July 2023. You can just Google PMID 375 13577. Okay, PMID 375-13577. That will get you right to the study. You can read it. It takes about 20 minutes. Okay, it's a very cool study. So here's the research question. Okay, the purpose of the study, and I'm pulling this directly from it. Okay, so I'm not making this up. I'm just quoting them. The purpose of the study was to determine the nitrogen balance in minimally active, and they define that as less than 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity per week, which I think is probably the majority of Americans. Okay, 150, by the way, we referenced this in a recent episode. That's actually the recommended moderate amount of time you want to be performing aerobic activity per the American Heart Association. So it's kind of cool. You can start to see how these numbers feed into research and considerations because they're looking at the same stuff we are. So these are people that are under the recommended amount of aerobic exercise or exercise in general, less than 150 minutes per week. So we would call these recreationally active Americans. They're not sedentary, but they're also not, highly active or vigorously active in that sense. So the purpose of the study was to determine nitrogen balance in minimally active male vegans ingesting a controlled eucaloric, which means that they were not losing weight or gaining weight, that they were in a neutral energy balance. Okay, a eucaloric diet containing the protein RDA, the recommended dietary allowance, of 0.8 grams per kilogram per day. It was, and this is again, according to them, it was hypothesized that participants would exhibit a negative nitrogen balance in response to this diet plan. So researchers, good researchers, of course, have a question and they have a hypothesis. They believe that the RDA, based on all that we've kind of talked about, the purpose of the RDA, who was studied, what fed into that recommendation, they hypothesized that vegan males in this subset would experience a negative nitrogen balance, that they would be consuming less nitrogen than they were excreting or expending on average over time. Okay. So real quick methodology, they recruited minimally active males. Like we said, their ages like 20 to 45. I think the average age was 26, if I remember correctly. Or maybe it was 29. Who adhered exclusively to a vegan diet for at least 1 year. We know some people do vegan for 3 months or 6 months. These were folks that were vegan for at least a year, so they've sort of normalized in that regard. And then I'm pulling this quote, participants received all foods for a complete 5-day menu plan, personalized to provide maintenance energy for light activity. Okay, using a calculation that we use called the Harris-Benedict. Okay. So basically what's happening is that they're being provided an individual meal plan and all the food to eat for 5 days. Okay. And you may think that that's a short amount of time. That is the minimally, I'll talk about that in a second. That's the minimal amount of time you need to really establish a nitrogen balance equation. So diets consisted of frozen meals, meal replacement shakes, dried fruits, protein from mixed, complementary, plant-based sources of varying degrees and of protein quality based on the DIAAS, which is the digestible, indispensable amino acid score. Long story short, there are 9 what we call essential amino acids that our body cannot produce on its own. And so what they did well in this study was that they controlled to make sure that they were getting a good mix of both branched-chain amino acids as well as the essential amino acids that our body cannot produce on its own. So that's one of the controlling factors of the study that I really appreciated. They made sure that they had a good amino acid profile. Amino acids, of course, are the building blocks of protein, okay? And so all that's to say, they held them in a controlled environment in that sense. It was not an inpatient study, so they didn't bring them into a lab and have them live there for 5 days, but they did provide all their food. They were free to live on their own, but they were provided all their food. They were asked to report on that if there was anything they didn't eat or anything like that. And so in that sense, I think it was a fairly controlled study, I would say, of these participants, okay? And they held that meal plan, which, by the way, if you go look at that study on the Nutrients Journal, you can actually look at the meal plan. You can look at a sample meal plan. You can also look at the list of foods that they could select from on their own, okay? So it was really cool. You can actually see that, especially for the vegans, if you want to kind of take a look at the meal plan that they constructed for the vegans to sort of articulate what a typical vegan meal would look like or meal plan would look like. So you can take a look at that in the study. So participants were allowed to eat selected foods, like I said, from a list of fruits and vegetables. They logged all foods eaten in a daily food log. Participants were scheduled to begin the 5-day feeding period, which is, by the way, again, the minimum adaptation period recommended for protein equilibrium. Okay, so it was on the low end, but it was in the sufficient range is needed to establish protein equilibrium. So they set this study for 5 days immediately following the baseline visit. We're going to get there. I know it's a lot of data, but I think it's just kind of a nerdy, fun thing. And then on day 5, participants collected a 24-hour urine sample to analyze nitrogen balance. Okay, so big picture. What the study did was say, here's what you eat in accordance with the RDA so that you're getting the recommended dietary allowance of protein. Then at the end of the 5 days, they pulled out the urine sample to test what they're hypothesizing is going to be they're consuming less nitrogen than they're expending over the 5-day period. Okay, so what were the results? They were correct in their hypothesis. 82.3% of the participants were in a negative nitrogen balance. Okay, so in sum, it appears that the vegan diet, right, establishes a negative nitrogen balance. Even if adhering to the recommended dietary allowance, which again was never specific to vegans in the first place. Okay, and this negative nitrogen balance that they established, that they saw in the research, you can take a look at the numbers in the study, was about 1.3 grams per day. What this could mean over the course of a year is about 6.6 pounds of lean tissue. Okay, so some of you might be hearing like negative nitrogen balance and 1.3 grams per day and 5 day. What does that mean? What that means is the catabolic breakdown of about 6.6 pounds of lean tissue. We're not talking about fat tissue. We're talking about adipose tissue, right? We should be reducing fat. Some of you, are like, well, shoot, I want to reduce my tissue, but you don't want to be reducing your lean tissue, your musculoskeletal system, right? That becomes, by the way, increasingly important later in life, not less important. Okay. So what a 1.3 gram negative nitrogen balance per day looks like over the course of a year is quite possibly 6.6 pounds of lost muscle. Okay. Now, this is not just about muscle. Keep in mind, there are more problems with a negative nitrogen balance than just the reduction in muscle, as important as that is. We can't shrug that off and just be like, oh, I'm not trying to be like super muscly. We all need healthy musculoskeletal system. And by the way, if you're after the age of 30 or 40, it becomes imperative. If you're not building muscle on purpose, you are losing muscle without even trying. That is clear in the research to varying degrees based off several different factors. But your body is going to start breaking down that tissue over time if you are not on purpose building muscle, ingesting appropriate amounts of protein, etc. Okay, because here's a quote I pulled from the study as well. A chronic negative nitrogen balance would adversely impact the synthesis of new proteins and eventually reduce skeletal muscle mass and the synthesis of enzymes, hormones, and immune factors, and impede tissue maintenance and repair. So keep in mind that protein makes up the vast majority of our body, right? It is the building of our tissues, of our organs, of even our bone. It pours out in terms of our skin, our hair. It's not just about muscle, as important as that is. And oh, by the way, the synthesis of enzymes, hormones, immune factors. And so if you're in a negative nitrogen balance consistently over time, you're going to see a decrease in functioning enzymes. You're going to see a decrease in some of the hormonal considerations. You're going to see a decrease in your immune function. So while you may not hear people screaming from the rooftops, be sure you're in, nitrogen balance equilibrium. What you may hear is that people are getting more sick more often, and that has immune functions. You may hear that people are struggling a lot with hormone imbalances, right? Enzyme issues. Okay, tissue maintenance, right? Not just later in life, but at all stages. So all that's to say the problem is about more than just, well, I don't really care about my muscle mass. It's deeper than that because protein starts at a cellular level. It's the building blocks, the structural and functional components of all cells and tissues in the body. Okay, so it's big. It's baked into our DNA. We can't get around that. So what's the conclusion? The conclusion of the study I'll pull another quote because I'm not trying to speak for the researchers. Okay. The results of this study suggest that the current U.S. RDA for protein, which is again 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, is not adequate to produce nitrogen equilibrium. That's where you're just at balance with your nitrogen in underactive vegan males consuming typical menu plans. Okay. So again, underactive does not mean sedentary. Okay. And male, obviously, this was a study exclusive to males. So we can't necessarily extrapolate these exactly to females. And I'm hoping another study comes out that does take a look at females and takes into account things like menstrual cycle. So I think it's very important, especially given, hormonal considerations, et cetera, that females deal with differently than males. So I hope there is some further research on this. But suffice it to say, the hypothesis was proven correct. Okay, that if as a vegan you are clinging to the RDA, well, I'm getting 0.8, and honestly, I've fair amount of vegans I've worked with over the past. A lot of them aren't even getting that. They don't even know what it is. They haven't calculated it on their individual needs. So keep in mind that one, a lot of people think the RDA is their goal. They're not even hitting that goal. And by the way, that goal is insufficient for vegans. Okay, per this study for nitrogen balance alone, which is really the underpinning of why you want to be consuming the proper amount of protein in the first place. Okay. And then I pulled this other quote. This one's pretty pointed. Okay. So if you're a vegan and you've candidly, if you spent a lot of time de-emphasizing, the need for protein or de-emphasizing the differences between animal protein and plant-based protein, of which we are a favor of both, by the way, favor of both. Okay, we can talk about where to source that. But here's a quote from the study, which I think is on the nose. Due to the inferior protein quality of most plant-based foods, again, this goes back to things like digestibility or bioavailability, the amino acid profile, leucine content, et cetera. There's criteria by which plant-based protein is considered nutritionally inferior to animal-based protein. Okay. So due to the inferior protein quality of most plant-based foods compared with animal-based foods, it is likely that the protein RDA should be amended with special recommendations for vegans, or at the very least highlight the importance of a diet with a higher protein intake to better guide and assure nutrient adequacy in vegans. Okay, so what they're saying is we either need to amend the RDA with a special recommendation for vegans, or at the very least, we need to stress to vegans that you're likely in a negative nitrogen balance, which has implications for health, both in the short term and long term. Or we need to make sure that you're not de-emphasizing protein. Now, we get that you have certain places you want to source that protein, right? We can talk about orienting where you get that protein, right? But let's not be in a conversation about de-emphasizing the need for protein, or that Americans get too much protein if they go above the RDA, right? Because that's not what we're talking about mechanistically. Okay. So what does all this mean? All right. And then Danielle, I would love your feedback on this. Well, first, that's the conclusion of the study. Any thoughts about the study? Anything that fascinated you before I keep rambling?
No, I loved it. I loved how we walked through that very clearly. And when I did a continuing ed on immune system a while ago, I didn't realize that, low intakes of protein can, have a toll on your immune system. So kind of fun to see two different studies saying the same thing. But I learned that a while ago, and cool to hear it again.
And for me, like, I think I hooked into the immune side of things perhaps earlier, but what I'm late to the game on is the importance of protein for hormonal profiles, right? And for building healthy hormones. Hormones, again, are chemical signals that are sent to the brain, right? And with the rise, what I think you and I both see consistently, far more conversations are taking place with clients about hormones and the impact on not only health, but energy, weight loss, whether they're, postmenopausal, et cetera. A lot of hormone considerations. And I have to start wondering if the de-emphasis, particularly with women, the de-emphasis of protein, right? Because men have done a massive disservice just trumping protein up as like the bodybuilder thing. Right. And it's like, and it's true. Yes, it builds. Yes, it's an anabolic, compound that we can build. But women have been long, I think, dissuaded from the importance of protein. We shouldn't be dissuaded from the importance of any of the macronutrients, by the way. We could do a whole episode on the importance of carbohydrates, a whole episode on the importance of fats, a whole episode on the importance of protein. Like, we should not be shying away from these. In fact, that's a red flag that you're dealing with a quack online, is that they're de-emphasizing one of the major macronutrients that we should be ingesting consistently. So I think I came late to the game on the hormone implications with protein, which is fascinating as well, let alone, again, what we both sort of knew was this underpinning nitrogen balance. But man, it just literally builds from there, So what does all this mean? Let me state this very clearly, 35 minutes in. Vegans likely need to increase their protein above the RDA. So first thing I would do is, are you consistently hitting the RDA? Okay, because I've had varying experiences. Some vegans are very focused on it, especially if they're training quite a bit. They are getting more than the RDA, or they are at least getting the RDA, and they know what the RDA is, and they're hitting it, and they've got a plan, but they're working to do that. But I've also spoken with, many vegans that don't know what that is. Okay, so I would say start there. I would take, your current body weight and take a look at 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, and start there as a foundation. And then know that you're likely, with this case alone, with this study alone, you need to go above that. And so hitting the foundation is the first step. Okay. Then moving up from there gradually over time in a way that's sustainable, right, is key. All right. And by the way, if you're looking to convert your body weight real quick, I have this in my notes. Just remember that if you just take your current body weight in pounds, so let's say you're 150 pounds, you can just multiply that on the calculator on your phone. You can just take your body weight, multiply that by 0.4535. I think that's the most accurate way. Some people also say just divide it by 2.2. This is a little bit more refined. I do the multiplication side rather than the division side when I'm calculating things with clients. So if you're 150 pounds and you multiply that by 0.535, right, you're going to get about 68 kilograms. Then you just multiply that number by 0.8, and that's how many grams of protein per day. Okay, and you'll see it's not a shocking number. It's not big, right? The RDA is a baseline. It's by no means really a goal for most people, to be honest. It's just a minimum required for sedentary adults that are omnivores or vegetarians to establish nitrogen equilibrium at worst. Hopefully positive nitrogen balance, but likely just an equilibrium, okay? So all that's to say protein from there. So that's your foundational number, is the RDA. But it goes up from there. Again, if you're a vegan, it goes up from there. If you have certain activity levels, it goes up from there. So if you strength train 1 or 2 times a week, or exercise 1 or 2 times a week, it goes up. 3 or 4 times a week, it goes up. 4, 5, 6 times a week, it goes up. Depending on your age, pregnancy, various considerations that we can't necessarily articulate all of them here. That's what we do with our clients one-on-one. But I would also say, so then the question is, okay, but where do I land, Mark? I need a number. If it's not 0.8, what is it? And then what I would say is that we can look to research, general research on various goals to inform that. But the first thing I think we have to do is we kind of have to unhook a little bit from RDA as sort of like, well, I just need to do the RDA as a vegan and then I'm good. We've established that it's got to be more than that. But the question is, where is it? So I would look to broader research. Real quick, there's an article on our website. You can just Google it right now. You can just Google, how much protein should I eat in a day? Imago Nutrition. That will pull up our article where I articulate all the research per various goals, life stages, ages, etc. Okay. But I'll give you a rundown right here because I want to give you all the value right here in this episode. If you're looking for optimal health, research indicates between 1.2 and 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Okay, so we're still dealing in kind of the same metric system. So RDA says 0.8, but we've established that's insufficient, particularly for vegans, or that just at least is for sedentary adults to have nitrogen equilibrium. So if you're looking for optimal health, and I cite the research in that article, so if you want to go take a look at these studies, every one of these recommendations comes from studies. It's not my theory or opinion or experience, okay? So optimal health, 1.2 to 1.6. And Danielle, you and I were talking just before this episode. There's something about this 1.6 number that if I had to hone in on a number, I would probably articulate that. If I knew nothing about someone and they asked how much protein, I would probably start with 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. Muscle gain, I've seen research from 1.6 to 2.2, but there's a fascinating new study that just came out, don't have time to go into it, that tested 1.6 versus 3.2. So they literally had people doing 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day and people doing double, 3.2. They found no significant difference between 1.6 and 3.2. So if you want to save some money and still get all the gains, hit that 1.6 number and keep strength training like an absolute maniac, right? And getting your sleep and your water and all the other things that go into building an anabolic state and building muscle. But you do not need to be doing 3.2, which makes me call into question even the study that I cite in that article about up to 2.2. I don't think it's as necessary to go as high as people think. Okay. So again, that 1.6 seems to be a number that a lot of this research is starting to hinge into, that has all the benefit while keeping it within reasonable range. Okay. For strength training athletes, we see in research about 1.4 to 1.8, and look what's right in the middle of that, 1.6, right? For endurance athletes, a little lower, interestingly enough. I think that has a lot to do with the fact that, and I work with endurance athletes, work with marathon runners, you've got to be stacking their carbs. A lot of times you just don't have room for a lot of, other nutrient profile stuff, but you've got to have adequate protein. So I've seen in endurance research, 1.2 to 1.4 grams. Okay. Doesn't mean 1.6 is wrong. So I kind of like that number. I'm kind of biasing, how I frame that number. But for pregnancy, we're seeing now pregnancy is different. Please don't take this too generally. Reach out if you're pregnant and you have nutritional questions about that. But in research, I've seen somewhere between 1.2 to 1.52, I think technically I cite in that article. Keep in mind that your protein needs actually go up through the various trimesters. It doesn't go down when you're pregnant. If you're breastfeeding, 1.3 grams per kilogram of body weight plus 25 grams is the recommendation. So 1.3 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day plus an additional 25 grams, just raw 25 grams. The elderly minimum, I would say, is 1.0 per the research to 1.3. Again, is there anything detrimental to 1.6? Nope. And so all that's to say, those are some of the other research data points that we have relative to specific context and goals that I would point you to. And then again, if as a vegan, you can unhook from RDA as sort of being like, that's the goal, you are free to move into the recommendations for these general population, because if 0.8 is insufficient and you decide to go to 1.2 to 1.6 for optimal health, I believe you're going to then establish nitrogen equilibrium, if not a positive nitrogen balance, and you're going to reap all the other benefits that research has shown about that level of intake. So that's the good news. The good news, and I'll challenge both sides, we don't need as much protein as some people say, but we likely need more than other people say, okay? And so we want to straddle, we want to be in the balance. And so 0.8 is likely not enough, though you don't need to be 3.2 in order to build muscle, okay? So, and the last point I would say on this is you may need to supplement. You may need. So if you are a vegan, you have cut out a significant portion in terms of food categories and food options. We just have to be honest about that. Okay. I understand why you're doing it. I can appreciate that. Again, all the way back to what I said at the beginning, I can appreciate you trying to find consistency with this belief system throughout all areas of your life. Okay. But this might be an area, we're not necessarily people that like to talk about supplements early or often. We always talk about food first, supplement second. And we still take that position here, food first. See if you can get up into that, 1.2 to 1.6 range without a supplement. But if you find it's hard, okay, particularly to really kind of mix and match to make sure you have a good amino acid profile, right? And you're finding it hard to get up there, I don't know how you feel about this, Danielle. I personally love to recommend a good pea protein for my vegan clients. Whether it's a pea isolate, I like pea isolate because then you're just kind of really just getting the pea protein in there without many additives. It's really lean. It's not going to be a lot in terms of caloric load. And pea protein, by the way, is complete. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just going to say this, I didn't plan to. I think pea protein is the best plant-based protein on the planet. Do you agree?
Really?
I think so. I think it beats soy. I think it beats wheat. I think it beats all of these other ones. It's complete. I think it's isolated. It can be more expensive, but vegan protein can be more expensive. I think it's great. I just think from kind of the standard of a complete amino acid profile, leucine content, digestibility, I think protein is top when it comes to only plant protein. Obviously, I think animal protein is inferior or superior based on no less than those three criteria: bioavailability, leucine content, and essential amino acid profile. But I love a good protein isolate, and so you may need to supplement with that as well.
Sounds great.
Any thoughts on that?
No. You did a lot of talking. Thank you
I know.
for all that information. I'm sorry I didn't contribute more.
No, not at all. And that's how we do it. I mean, I'm always learning from you on a lot of different things too. So every once in a while, I've got to flex my muscle, no pun intended, and show you that I know a couple things too. So, so as always, if you're kind of digesting all this and just sort of like, okay, I kind of get it. Thanks. Maybe 1.2 to 1.6, but how do I run that number with my training regimen or my seasonality or my schedule or my work or my food preferences? And I just don't see how I can actually come to a solid conclusion on this to have a path forward. Please let us help in that regard. Okay. Again, would love to help you understand with clarity what this means for you in your context, what it means for your health outcomes, for your flourishing, as we say. And so if we can help you in that regard, whether myself or Danielle, we would love to. If you're like, that guy's annoying, but I'd talk with Danielle, I totally get it. Reach out to us. Okay. Or if you're like, I just need that guy to yell at me and tell me what to do, I get those clients too. Okay. So Danielle doesn't lie. So if you're looking for, a kind, caring guy, no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. We both care for all of our clients. So we love it. So all that's to say, just know that we're here for you, and we would love to help you have an articulated plan to make sure that these considerations are accounted for. Whether you're vegan, vegetarian, omnivore, carnivore, we've worked with them all. Okay, you can't scare us. All right, so with that, thank you so much. I think this has been a fun episode. I particularly just thought this was a fascinating study, very recent, very cool. Hope there's more study in this area done. But for everyone listening, hope you kind of understand a bit more of the nitrogen balance equation, why protein, another layer of kind of why protein is important, how some of these recommendations are established. But of course, knowing your individual context is key. And if we can help, please let us know. So with that, we'd love for you to subscribe to the podcast if this was at all helpful. Drop us a review. Let us know how we're doing. Whether you're vegan, vegetarian, omnivore, thinking about carnivore, drop us a review. Let us know. And share with a friend. We'd love to help as many people as possible. That's why we do this podcast. No one pays us to do it. We love to do it. And so if we could just help as many people as possible with this free content, that's what we're here for. If you're on social media, you can follow us at Imago Nutrition. That's IMAGO Nutrition. And as always, we'd like to thank the band Happy Pill for our theme song, Thinkin Bout Food. We'll see you next time.